Billionaire visits orphanage, and girl says, "I know you." The shocking truth changes everything. The reflection in the private elevator mirror showed an impeccable man in his tailored Italian suit. Gabriel Mendez adjusted his burgundy tie with practiced precision, dark brown eyes shadowed by sleepless nights scrutinizing every detail of his appearance. The same scrutiny he gave to his company's financial reports. "Mr. Mendez," the awaiting Regina's voice, his executive assistant of 15 years, carried a strange urgency through the intercom. He knew that tone. Something was off script. The elevator doors opened to the 47th floor of Mendez Tower, Boston's most imposing financial landmark. Regina stood waiting, clutching a folder with white-knuckled hands. "Sir, there's been a situation at Sunshine House Orphanage." Gabriel stopped abruptly. "Cancel it." "We can't. The press is already there." Regina's voice dropped lower. "And sir, there's something else. A girl. She has a photograph of you from Harvard. She says." Regina hesitated. "She says she's your daughter." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Boston's skyline blurred as a memory crashed through 20 years of carefully constructed walls. A summer evening at Harvard, Lucia's green eyes sparkling as she said, "We need to talk, Gabriel. It's important." He had walked away that night, choosing ambition over love. Now, 2 decades later, those words returned with devastating clarity. "How old is she?" His voice was barely a whisper. 19, sir. Born 9 months after you left Harvard." The morning sun caught the edge of his empire's glass tower, casting a shadow that seemed to stretch endlessly across the city, like the long reach of past mistakes finally catching up. The morning sun glinted off the mirrored facade of Mendez Tower, casting long shadows across Boston's financial district. At 42 stories, the building stood as a testament to Gabriel Mendez's meteoric rise from scholarship student to corporate titan. Inside his penthouse office, the trappings of success surrounded him: Italian marble floors, handcrafted mahogany furniture, and a view that made lesser CEOs envious. Gabriel stood at the window, watching the city wake up below. His reflection showed a man at the peak of his professional powers, sharp features hardened by years of boardroom battles, dark hair now touched with distinguished silver at the temples, and eyes that had mastered the art of intimidation. The Wall Street Journal had once called him Boston's most ruthless CEO. He'd taken it as a compliment. Mendez Corp's latest quarterly report lay open on his desk: acquisitions in tech, real estate holdings across 3 continents, and a workforce of over 50,000. The numbers told a story of relentless ambition achieved through calculated precision. Every decision in the past 20 years had been measured, weighed, and executed with surgical efficiency. Mr. Mendez. Regina appeared in the doorway, her usual composure slightly fractured. After 15 years as his executive assistant, she was the closest thing to family he had allowed himself. "The board members are gathering for the emergency meeting." The boardroom occupied the entire east wing of the 40th floor. 12 of Boston's most powerful executives sat around a gleaming conference table, their faces reflecting varying degrees of concern and calculation. Victoria Blackwood, the board chair, stood at the head of the table. At 60, she had seen corporate empires rise and fall, and her steel-grey eyes missed nothing. "The press is already speculating," she said, sliding a tablet across the table. The headlines screamed across the screen: Mendez Corp CEO linked to orphanage scandal and secret heir to Boston's biggest fortune. The world Gabriel had built with such precision was beginning to crack. Outside his window, construction crews were adding the finishing touches to Mendez Tower's new wing, a $500 million expansion that would house the company's tech division. Every detail had been planned, every contingency considered, except this. "Your private life has always been an asset," Gabriel Victoria continued. "No scandals, no messy relationships, nothing to distract from business. But this," she tapped the tablet. This could undo everything we've built. The morning light caught the edge of a framed magazine cover on his office wall. Gabriel Mendes, the man who never makes mistakes, the irony wasn't lost on him. His biggest mistake, the one he'd buried deepest, had finally found him. His phone buzzed. Another message from Catherine Morrison, director of Sunshine House Orphanage. Each unanswered text felt like another crack in his carefully constructed walls. The girl Clara had his eyes. The photograph she held showed a younger version of himself, arm wrapped around a laughing Lucia Martinez in front of Harvard's library, a moment frozen in time before ambition had consumed everything else. The empire he'd built stood as a monument to controlled growth, controlled risks, controlled emotions. But now, as he stared at the city he'd helped shape, Gabriel Mendes faced something he couldn't control, with market strategies or hostile takeovers, the consequences of a heart he'd locked away 20 years ago. The shareholders' meeting is in an hour, Regina reminded him softly. They'll want answers. Gabriel straightened his tie, a gesture as familiar as breathing. The morning sun had fully risen now, turning the city's glass towers into mirrors reflecting his success back at him. But for the first time in 20 years, he wondered about the price of that reflection. The library's ancient oak shelves towered over the study area, their shadows dancing in the autumn sunlight. Gabriel Mendes hunched over his economics textbooks, his scholarship hanging by a thread. His second-hand laptop displayed spreadsheets of carefully calculated expenses every meal, every textbook, every minute accounted for. "You know that chair you're sitting in? It's mine." The melodious voice cut through his concentration. He looked up, ready to argue, but the words died in his throat. She stood there, dark hair caught in the late afternoon light, green eyes sparkling with amusement. "Table 23, third chair from the left. I've been sitting here for 2 years." "I don't see your name on it," Gabriel replied, turning back to his work. The midterm was tomorrow, and he couldn't afford distractions. "I'm Lucia Martinez." She pulled out the chair beside him. "And you're Gabriel Mendes, the scholarship wonder boy who's making Professor Williams nervous about his curve." That got his attention. "How do you?" "I grade papers for the economics department," she grinned. "Your last essay on market derivatives was brilliant. Ruthlessly logical, but brilliant." Those first moments in the library began a transformation neither could have predicted. Lucia, daughter of professors, brought color to Gabriel's monochrome world of numbers and ambitions. She taught him to see beauty in imperfection, to find poetry in chaos. He showed her how dreams could be built on foundations of careful planning. Their love bloomed against the backdrop of ivy-covered walls and academic ambitions. Late-night study sessions turned into dawn conversations about the future. Lucia's guitar serenaded the stars while Gabriel calculated the probability of their forever. But beneath their idyllic romance, forces were gathering. Wall Street beckoned with promises of power and validation. Gabriel's childhood memories of poverty drove him forward, each success a brick in the wall he built against vulnerability. "You can't plan everything," Gabe Lucia would say, watching him organize his life into spreadsheets. "Some things you have to feel." He'd smile, not understanding that her words were both observation and prophecy. The world runs on numbers, Lua. Dreams need foundations. In his current office, 20 years later, Gabriel picked up a frame he kept hidden in his desk drawer. The photograph showed 2 young people in front of Harvard's library, a laughing girl with green eyes and a boy whose smile still held hope. He barely recognized himself. The last time he'd seen Lucia, she'd been running after him in the rain. "Please, Gabriel, just listen. There's something you need to know." But he'd been focused on catching his flight to New York, his mind already calculating compound interest rates and market trajectories. Her voice had faded behind him, along with everything else that couldn't be quantified in a spreadsheet. Now, as Boston's morning traffic hummed 40 stories below, Gabriel faced the cost of those calculations. The girl at Sunshine House Orphanage had Lucia's eyes and his determination, a living reminder of the night he'd chosen ambition over answers. His phone buzzed again. Another message from the orphanage, Mr. Mendes. Clara would like to meet you. She has her mother's letters. Sunshine House stood in stark contrast to Boston's gleaming skyscrapers. The Victorian-era building's red brick walls told stories of generations of children who had passed through its doors. Clara Martinez sat in the window seat of the third-floor dormitory, her mother's worn leather diary open in her lap. Through the glass she could see the city skyline, including the imposing silhouette of Mendes Tower. The other girls in the dormitory whispered about her obsession with the financial news, the way she collected every article about Gabriel Mendes. Trust fund hunter, they called her behind her backs. But Clara knew something they didn't, the truth hidden in her mother's final letters. Catherine Morrison, Sunshine House's director, watched Clara with growing concern. In her 30 years of running the orphanage, she'd never met a 19-year-old quite like her. While other residents her age focused on college applications or job searches, Clara spent hours in the library studying corporate finance and business strategy. "Your mother would be proud of your dedication," Catherine said one evening, finding Clara analyzing Mendes Corp's latest annual report. "But she'd also want you to live a little." Clara touched the photograph hidden between the diary's pages. Mom always said timing was everything, that some moments were worth waiting for. Her fingers traced the young faces in the image, her mother's radiant smile, her father's ambitious eyes. "I've waited 19 years, Ms. Morrison. I can wait a little longer." The orphanage's daily routine continued around her younger children playing in the courtyard, teenagers helping with homework, social workers coming and going with potential adoptive parents. 3 families had already expressed interest in adopting Clara, attracted by her maturity and intelligence. She declined each time, much to Catherine's frustration. "You can't put your life on hold forever," Catherine had argued after the last refusal. "Gabriel Mendes may never acknowledge you." But Clara had inherited more than just her father's eyes. She had his determination, his ability to focus on a goal with laser precision. The diary entries she'd memorized told her something else about him, something her mother had seen beneath his ambitious exterior. "He has a heart bigger than his dreams," Lucia had written. "He just needs someone to remind him it exists." The other residents treated Clara differently after the first newspaper article appeared linking her to the Mendes fortune. Some avoided her, others tried to befriend her for potential advantages. But Clara remained focused, spending her evenings writing in her own diary, parallel entries to her mother's from 2 decades ago. But tonight she watched the lights come on in Mendes Tower, knowing her father was there, perhaps standing at his window looking out at the same city. The distance between them seemed both vast and insignificant. Everything she knew about him came from her mother's writings and public records: his rise from scholarship student to CEO, his reputation for ruthless efficiency, his perfect record of successful acquisitions. But she also knew something: no business magazine had ever captured the way his voice softened when he talked about dreams in her mother's diary entries, how he'd once spent his last dollars buying Lucia roses instead of dinner. "He'll come," Clara whispered to her reflection in the window. "Mom said he always calculated every move carefully. He just needs to realize that some calculations aren't about numbers." Below, the evening traffic moved through Boston's streets like blood through veins, connecting all parts of the city. Somewhere in that flow of life, 2 decades of separation were about to end, and Clara Martinez was ready. The press conference room at Mendes Tower buzzed with anticipation. Gabriel stood behind the podium, his posture perfect, his expression carefully neutral. Camera flashes created a strobe effect as he announced Mendes Corp's latest acquisition, a $2 billion tech merger that would dominate tomorrow's business headlines. Then came the question that shattered his performance. "Mr. Mendes, can you comment on reports that you have a teenage daughter at Sunshine House Orphanage?" The room fell silent. Gabriel's hands tightened imperceptibly on the podium's edge, his knuckles whitening beneath the harsh lights. For a fraction of a second, his mask slipped, revealing something raw and vulnerable in his eyes. No further questions. Regina stepped in, but the damage was done. The reporters erupted, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of demands and accusations. In his private office minutes later, Gabriel stared at the photograph Catherine Morrison had sent him. The image was unmistakable: himself and Lucia outside Harvard's library, their young faces frozen in a moment of perfect happiness. But it was the handwriting on the back that made his hands shake. "The day I tried to tell you about our baby. Lua." "The girl's name is Clara Martinez," Regina reported, her voice gentle. "Born December 15th, 2004. Her mother was Lucia Martinez." She paused, watching her boss carefully. "There's more. Lucia passed away last year. Car accident. She was trying to reach you." Gabriel sank into his chair, memories flooding back. The last time he'd seen Lucia, she'd been running after his taxi in the rain, calling his name. He'd been on his way to sign his first major deal, his mind focused on futures and derivatives. He hadn't looked back. The sound of breaking glass startled them both. Gabriel's hand had tightened around his whiskey tumbler until it shattered, blood mixed with aged scotch on his imported desk. "Sir, you're bleeding." Regina moved to help, but Gabriel waved her away. "Show me everything," he commanded, his voice hoarse. "Every detail about Clara's life. Every record, every photo, everything." The dossier Regina compiled told a story that cut deeper than the glass had. Clara had excelled academically, earning scholarships just like he had. She'd turned down multiple adoption offers from wealthy families. And she'd spent years collecting every piece of news about him, building a picture of the father she'd never known. "She has your eyes," Regina observed softly, showing him a recent photograph. "And Lucia's smile." Gabriel touched the image, leaving a faint blood stain on its corner. The girl in the photo stood in front of Sunshine House, her posture eerily similar to his own straight back, chin lifted slightly, radiating determination. But there was something else, something in her expression that reminded him painfully of Lucia Hope. His phone rang. Victoria Blackwood's name flashed on the screen, no doubt calling about damage control. The board would want to minimize exposure, protect the company's image. They'd suggest denial, distance, perhaps a generous donation to the orphanage in exchange for silence. 20 years ago, he'd made a choice in the rain, putting ambition before love. Now, standing in his tower of glass and steel, Gabriel Mendez faced another crossroads. "Get the car ready," he told Regina, reaching for his coat, "and cancel my meetings for the rest of the day." "Sir? The board is expecting." "They can wait." He paused at the door, looking back at his empire of numbers and calculations. "Some things are more important than quarterly reports." The elevator descended, each floor marking another step toward a past he'd tried to forget. In his pocket, the photograph of himself and Lucia seemed to burn against his chest. The girl waiting at Sunshine House wasn't a problem to be solved or a crisis to be managed. She was the embodiment of his greatest mistake and, perhaps, his last chance at redemption. Boston's afternoon traffic parted before his Bentley like a river around a stone. As Mendez Tower receded in his rearview mirror, Gabriel realized he was shaking. For the first time in 2 decades, he was about to face something he couldn't control, couldn't predict, couldn't reduce to numbers on a spreadsheet. He was about to meet his daughter. The emergency board meeting at Mendes Corp erupted into chaos the moment Gabriel left for Sunshine House. Victoria Blackwood stood at the head of the mahogany conference table, her usual composure cracking as she addressed the 11 other board members. "This is unprecedented," she declared, pulling up real-time stock charts on the wall screen. The numbers were already bleeding red. 20 years of perfect reputation management, undone in a matter of hours. Maxwell Wright, head of legal, spread documents across the table. The press is digging deeper. They're not just focused on the girl anymore. They're questioning every major decision Gabriel's made in the past month. Because he's distracted Richard Morton, the oldest board member, interjected. 3 delayed acquisitions, 2 missed investor calls, and now this public spectacle. The Gabriel Mendes we know would never be this careless. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the boardroom as Victoria paced, her heels clicking against Italian marble. We've spent 2 decades building Mendes Corp's image efficiency, precision, unwavering focus. A secret daughter doesn't fit that narrative. There's more, Maxwell added grimly. The girl's mother, Lucia Martinez, she tried to contact Gabriel multiple times before her death. Our corporate filters blocked her calls, following standard protocols for unsolicited personal contacts. The revelation hit like a thunderbolt. Victoria sank into her chair, understanding the implications. If the press gets hold of that. They already have Morton tossed the latest online headlines onto the table. Social media is painting us as the heartless corporation that kept a dying mother from reaching her child's father. Regina entered the boardroom, her loyalty visibly torn between her boss and the company she'd helped build. Mr. Mendes has arrived at Sunshine House. The press is already there. This isn't just about reputation anymore, Victoria realized, standing to face the Boston skyline. This is about control. Gabriel's changing, questioning everything we built, if he lets emotion cloud his judgment. The Taiwanese merger, Morton finished her thought. The tech acquisition, the European expansion, everything we've planned could collapse. Then we don't give him the chance, Maxwell proposed, his voice cold with corporate calculation. The bylaws are clear. If a CEO's personal actions threaten company stability, the board can vote for temporary suspension of duties. The suggestion hung in the air like smoke. These were the people who'd helped Gabriel build his empire, who'd celebrated every victory, who'd benefited from his ruthless pursuit of success. Now they sat in his tower, plotting his removal. He'll fight back, Regina warned, her voice sharp with loyalty. You all know Gabriel. He didn't build this company by backing down. Victoria turned from the window, her decision made. Call an emergency shareholder meeting. We'll present it as a temporary measure, for the good of the company. Gabriel needs time to deal with personal matters, that's how we'll phrase it. And if he refuses, someone asked. Then we remind him, Victoria replied, that empires are easier to destroy than to build. Every decision he's ever made, every aggressive takeover, every terminated employee, it all looks different through the lens of a man abandoning his child for corporate success. The board members exchanged glances, years of loyalty warring with financial self-interest. One by one, they nodded their agreement. We're doing this for his own good, Victoria assured them, but her words rang hollow against the boardroom's marble walls. Sometimes to protect what you've built, you have to be cruel to be kind. Regina stood silently by the door, her hand clutching her phone. On the screen was a message from Gabriel. Sent moments ago. She has Lucia's smile. Outside, the afternoon sun caught Mendes Tower's glass facade, transforming the building into a pillar of fire against the Boston sky. Inside its crystalline heights, the seeds of betrayal were taking root, fed by the same ambition that had built this empire in the first place. The board members dispersed, their decisions made, their consciences salved with corporate rhetoric. But as Regina watched them go, she remembered something Lucia Martinez had written in her final letter, which now sat unopened in Gabriel's desk. The true measure of wealth isn't in what you own, but in what owns your heart. The Boston Globe's newsroom buzzed with frantic energy as Sarah Chen, senior investigative reporter, pieced together the biggest story of her career. Screens around her displayed various headlines about Gabriel Mendes and his newly discovered daughter, each more sensational than the last. Exclusive: Mendes Corp CEO's secret love child. Abandoned mother dies seeking billionaire father. From Harvard love story to corporate tragedy. Sarah stared at her growing investigation board. 20 years of Gabriel Mendes' life mapped out in photographs, articles, and financial reports. His rise from scholarship student to corporate titan had been meteoric and suspiciously well-timed. "Look at this," her research assistant pointed to a timeline. 9 months after Mendes left Harvard, Lucia Martinez withdrew from her PhD program. The same week, he secured his first major investment deal. Sarah circled the date in red. And here, every time Lucia tried to contact him over the years, Mendes Corp announced a major acquisition or expansion, almost like he was building walls of success to keep his past at bay. The story was spreading like wildfire across social media. Mendes' secret and corporate father trended nationwide. Anonymous sources from within Mendes Corp leaked emails suggesting a systematic effort to block Lucia's attempts at contact. In the corner office, Editor-in-Chief James Patterson reviewed Sarah's draft. "We need to be careful here," he warned. "Mendes's lawyers are notorious. Every word needs to be bulletproof." "The facts speak for themselves," Sarah argued. "A brilliant student gets pregnant. The father chooses career over family, builds an empire while she raises their child alone. Then, trying to reach him one last time, she dies in a car accident 3 blocks from Mendes Tower." The tragic irony wasn't lost on anyone. Lucia Martinez had spent her final moments so close to her goal, yet still impossibly far from reaching it. Public sentiment was dividing sharply. Some saw Gabriel as a villain, the embodiment of corporate greed sacrificing human connection for profit. Others defended him, arguing that Lucia should have tried harder to tell him about the pregnancy before he left. "There's more," Sarah added, pulling up Clara's academic records. "The daughter, Clara, she's brilliant. Top of her class, multiple scholarship offers. She's been following her father's career since she was old enough to read financial news." Social media exploded with side-by-side comparisons of Gabriel and Clara, their posture, their determined expressions, the intensity in their eyes. Amateur psychologists analyzed every photo, every gesture, building narratives of nature versus nurture. Sunshine House became besieged by reporters. Every resident, staff member, and visitor was a potential source of information. Paparazzi camped outside, hoping to catch the moment Gabriel Mendes would arrive to meet his daughter. "But here's what doesn't add up," Sarah mused, staring at her evidence wall. "Why now? Clara's been at Sunshine House for months. Lucia's death made local news. Mendes Corp's media monitoring is legendary, they must have known." The answer came from an unexpected source. A former Harvard librarian reached out with an old visitor's log. There, in faded ink, was a record of Lucia's last visit to the university library, just weeks before her death. She'd requested access to the alumni archives, specifically photographs from 2004. The photograph, Sarah breathed, the pieces clicking into place. That's what Clara was waiting for. Physical proof of her parents together. Something even Gabriel Mendes couldn't deny. The story was evolving beyond simple scandal. It was becoming a modern parable about choice and consequence, ambition and responsibility, love and loss. Every detail Sarah uncovered added new layers of complexity to the narrative. As evening fell over Boston, Sarah looked out her office window at Mendes Tower gleaming in the distance. Somewhere in that glass and steel monument to success, decisions were being made that would affect not just a family, but an empire. Her phone buzzed with a news alert breaking Gabriel Mendes arrives at Sunshine House. Below was a photo of Boston's most powerful CEO, looking uncharacteristically human as he stepped out of his car. Sarah opened a new document and began to type. 20 years ago, 2 young people in love stood in Harvard's library, their futures bright with promise. Today, their choices echo through the halls of power, reminding us that even the mightiest empires are built on foundations of human hearts. The historic corridors of Sunshine House fell silent as Gabriel Mendes walked through its doors. Catherine Morrison waited in her office, watching through the window as the man who dominated Boston's business headlines approached with uncharacteristic hesitation in his step. "Mr. Mendes," Catherine greeted him, noting how his practiced corporate composure faltered at the sight of children's artwork decorating her walls. "Clara's waiting in the garden. She specifically requested that location." Understanding flickered in Gabriel's eyes. Lucia had always loved gardens. In their Harvard days, she'd insisted on studying outdoors whenever possible, saying concrete walls stifled creativity. The garden was modest by his current standards, a small courtyard with weathered benches and determined flowers pushing through Boston's unforgiving soil. Clara sat on a stone bench, her mother's diary open in her lap. She didn't look up as Gabriel approached, though her fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on the book's worn cover. "The azaleas are blooming early this year," she said quietly, still not looking at him. "Mom's favorite. She wrote about the ones outside the Harvard Library in her diary. Said they reminded her of new beginnings." Gabriel stood frozen, struck by how much she sounded like Lucia, the same thoughtful cadence, the same way of finding meaning in simple things. When Clara finally raised her eyes to meet his, it was like looking into a mirror of his younger self, tempered by Lucia's gentle wisdom. "You have questions," she stated, not asked. Another trait they shared, addressing challenges directly. "Many," Gabriel admitted, his voice rougher than he intended. "But first I need you to know something. If I had known—" "Would it have made a difference?" Clara interrupted, her tone carefully neutral. 20 years ago, if Mom had managed to tell you about me that night in the rain, would you have stayed?" The question hit him like a physical blow. The carefully prepared speeches, the explanations he'd rehearsed in the car, all evaporated in the face of her direct inquiry. "I don't know," he answered honestly, surprising himself. "The man I was then, he thought he knew exactly what he wanted. And the man you are now." Gabriel looked around the garden, at the institution that had become his daughter's home while he accumulated wealth in his glass tower. "The man I am now understands how poor his calculations were." Clara nodded, accepting his answer without judgment, another echo of Lucia that made his chest ache. She opened the diary to a marked page and began to read. "Dear Diary, today I felt our baby move for the first time. I wondered if she would inherit Gabriel's determination or my tendency to see magic in ordinary moments, perhaps both." Her voice caught slightly on the last words. Gabriel found himself moving forward, an instinct he didn't know he possessed making him want to comfort her. He stopped, uncertain of his right to offer solace for pain he had inadvertently caused. "She wrote about you every day," Clara continued, regaining her composure. "Not with anger or bitterness, but with hope. She believed that someday, when the time was right, you would be ready to know about me." From his pocket, Gabriel withdrew the photograph that had started everything. The young couple in the image smiled at the camera, unaware of how their story would unfold. "Your mother," he said carefully, "was always better at seeing the truth in people than I was." She also wrote this. Clara pulled out a sealed envelope, her hand trembling slightly. "The day before the accident. She was trying to deliver it to you personally, but—" Gabriel took the envelope, his corporate facade cracking as he recognized Lucia's handwriting. The letter was dated exactly 1 year ago, the day of her fatal accident, 3 blocks from his office. The garden fell silent except for distant children's laughter and the rustle of leaves in the spring breeze. 2 decades of choices, consequences, and missed connections hung between father and daughter like an invisible wall. "I'm not looking for a fairy tale ending," Clara said finally, standing to face him fully. "I don't need your money or your name, but I would like to know the man my mother never stopped believing in." Gabriel Mendes, the man who had built an empire through calculated decisions and emotional distance, found himself facing the most important negotiation of his life. But this time the stakes weren't measured in dollars or market shares. "I would like that too," he replied softly, "if you'll give me the chance." A gentle smile, Lucia's smile, crossed Clara's face. "Mum always said timing was everything." She gestured to the bench beside her. "We have 19 years to catch up on. Shall we begin? The evening sun cast long shadows across Catherine Morrison's office as she handed Gabriel a weathered cardboard box. These belonged to Lucia. She left them with specific instructions that they should be given to Clara when she turned 18, and to you, if you ever came. Inside, decades of memories lay preserved in carefully organized journals, letters, and photographs. Gabriel sat in the worn leather chair. Clara perched anxiously on its arm as they opened the first diary together. September 15th, 2004. Clara read, her voice steady despite the emotion evident in her eyes. Gabriel finally agreed to coffee today. He tried to bring his economics textbook, but I confiscated it. Sometimes I think he forgets there's a world beyond numbers and market projections, but when he smiles, really smiles, I see the dreamer hiding behind all those calculations. Gabriel's hands trembled as he touched the familiar handwriting. The pages held a parallel history of his life, seen through eyes that had loved him despite his flaws. Each entry revealed the man he'd been before ambition hardened him. Here's the day she found out about me. Clara turned to a dog-eared page. December 1st, 2004. The test was positive. 2 blue lines that changed everything. I tried to tell him today, but the Wall Street internship letter arrived, and his eyes lit up with such hope. How do you tell someone their dreams are about to collide with reality? They discovered letters Lucia had written but never sent, each one addressed to major milestones in Gabriel's career. The day he made partner. His first corporate takeover. The opening of Mendy's Tower. She'd followed his rise from afar, maintaining a one-sided correspondence that chronicled both his successes and the moments he'd missed. Dear Gabriel, read one letter dated Clara's 5th birthday. Our daughter asked about you today. I showed her your picture in the Financial Times. She said you looked lonely in your big office. Children see things we miss, don't they? She has your analytical mind, but thank goodness, my heart. Catherine brought them tea as the hours passed, watching the corporate titan and his newfound daughter piece together their shared history through Lucia's words. The diaries revealed a love story that hadn't ended with separation but had transformed into something deeper, a mother's determination to preserve a father's legacy for their child. March 3rd, 2023. Clara's voice caught as she reached one of the final entries. The doctors say I don't have much time. There's so much I need to tell Gabriel, so many things Clara should know. But perhaps the most important truth is the simplest love doesn't keep ledgers. It doesn't calculate returns on investment. It simply gives, hoping that someday the heart will remember its capacity for wonder. Gabriel found himself reading about board meetings he remembered clearly, but now seen through a different lens. The day he'd announced Mendy's Corp's IPO, Lucia had been teaching Clara to read. During his most celebrated merger, they'd been planting a garden together, naming flowers after constellations. She never stopped believing you'd find your way back, Catherine said softly, placing a final envelope on the desk. This was in her personal effects after the accident, the letter she was trying to deliver to you. The sealed envelope bore Gabriel's name in Lucia's elegant script. Clara squeezed his hand as he opened it, the paper crinkling with the weight of unspoken words. My dearest Gabriel, by the time you read this, I may be gone. The doctors have given me their final prognosis, and I find myself thinking of that rainy night at Harvard when everything changed. You chose your path, and I chose to let you go. Not out of weakness, but because love sometimes means allowing people to learn their own truths in their own time. Our daughter is extraordinary. She has your mind, my heart, and a wisdom entirely her own. I've taught her to see the beauty in numbers, just as you once showed me the poetry in market trends. She's ready to know you now, and I believe you're finally ready to know her. Remember that autumn day in the library? You said everything in life could be quantified, measured, predicted. I argued that the most precious things defy calculation. Perhaps we were both right. You built an empire of numbers, while I created a legacy of love. Now it's time for these worlds to meet, all with eternal love. Lua. The office fell silent except for the ticking of an old wall clock. Outside, Boston's lights began to twinkle in the growing dusk, but inside Sunshine House, time seemed to stand still as father and daughter absorbed the weight of Lucia's final words. The morning headlines blazed across Boston's media landscape with unrelenting intensity. Gabriel's Bentley crawled through a sea of reporters outside Mendes Tower, their cameras flashing like strobe lights against the tinted windows. Inside, Clara sat beside him, her composure remarkable despite the chaos. "Mr. Mendes, is it true you're changing your will?" "Clara, how does it feel to be Boston's newest heiress?" Was this a planned publicity stunt? Victoria Blackwood waited in the lobby, her expression a careful mask of corporate concern. "Gabriel, the shareholders are demanding answers. Your personal situation is affecting market confidence." "My daughter," Gabriel corrected firmly, "is not a situation." Clara's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on his arm at the word daughter. The executive floor had transformed into a war room. PR teams huddled over crisis management strategies, lawyers reviewed adoption paperwork, and board members whispered in corners, their conversations stopping abruptly when Gabriel and Clara passed. "The Taiwan merger is threatening to pull out," Maxwell reported, hurrying alongside them. "They're concerned about stability and leadership. We need to project strength, continuity." "What we need," Gabriel interrupted, "is to remember that some things matter more than quarterly projections." The words echoed through the hushed corridor, causing several heads to turn. In his office, Regina had arranged breakfast, Clara's favorite blueberry pancakes, a detail gleaned from Catherine Morrison. The gesture wasn't lost on either of them. "They're afraid of me," Clara observed quietly, watching the corporate drama unfold through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Not of who I am, but of what I represent. Change, uncertainty, human complexity in their world of spreadsheets and algorithms." Gabriel recognized Lucia's insightful analysis in her words. "They're afraid of what I might become," he added. "The man they've relied on for perfect, emotionless decisions now has a heart they can't quantify." Victoria's voice carried through the closed door. "The board is calling for an emergency vote of confidence." Regina's response was too low to hear, but her protective stance was clear through the frosted glass. "You could lose everything you've built," Clara said, turning to face him. "All because of me." Gabriel looked at his empire spread out below them, the buildings, the power, the wealth he'd accumulated in place of human connection. Then he looked at his daughter, seeing in her face the perfect blend of his determination and Lucia's compassion. "20 years ago I thought I knew what everything meant," he replied. "I was wrong." The intercom buzzed. "Sir, the board is assembling. They're requesting your immediate presence. Alone." Clara stood, smoothing her skirt with the same gesture he used to adjust his tie. "Go. Show them that gaining a daughter hasn't cost you your strength, it's revealed it." In the boardroom, 12 faces turned to him with varying degrees of concern and calculation. Victoria stood at the head of the table, slides displaying plummeting stock prices and negative media coverage. "We've prepared a statement," she began, acknowledging Clara's existence but maintaining professional distance. "The markets need reassurance that Mendes Corp's leadership remains focused and unchanged." Gabriel walked to the window, the same view he'd looked at for 20 years. But now he saw it differently, not as a monument to his success, but as the price of his greatest failure. "I've made exactly 3 perfect decisions in my life," he said, his voice carrying the weight of revelation. "The first was accepting a Harvard scholarship. The second was falling in love with Lucia Martinez." He turned to face the board. "The third was walking into Sunshine House yesterday." Gabriel, Victoria's voice held a warning. "Think carefully about your next words." He smiled, the same smile that had sealed billion-dollar deals and crushed corporate rivals. "Oh, I have. For the first time in 20 years, I'm thinking with perfect clarity." The boardroom fell silent as Gabriel Mendes, the man they'd known only as a paragon of corporate precision, reached into his pocket and withdrew Lucia's final letter. "Shall I read you what real wealth looks like?" he asked, unfolding the paper with careful reverence. "Because I think it's time for a new definition of success." The revelation came during a quiet evening at Sunshine House, 3 weeks after Gabriel and Clara's first meeting. Catherine Morrison sat in her office, her expression grave as she handed Gabriel a thin medical file. "There's something you need to know," she began, her voice carrying the weight of professional obligation warring with personal concern. "6 months ago, before we discovered your connection, Clara experienced a severe emotional crisis." Gabriel opened the file, his practiced corporate composure crumbling as he read the clinical documentation. "Attempted suicide by prescription medication overdose," the report stated dispassionately. "Patient discovered in dormitory by staff. Immediate medical intervention successful." "It happened after she received news of Lucia's accident," Catherine explained, watching Gabriel's hands tighten on the file's edges. "She blamed herself for her mother's death. Lucia was trying to reach your office that night, carrying proof of Clara's paternity." The formal incident report contained details that cut deeper than any hostile takeover subject, expressed feelings of abandonment and unworthiness. Recurring theme of parental rejection noted in therapy sessions. "Why wasn't I informed immediately?" Gabriel's voice carried a dangerous edge. "Clara made us promise," Catherine replied steadily. "She wanted to meet you as an equal, not an obligation. She was determined that when you learned about her existence it would be on her terms, not through pity or guilt." Through the office window, they could see Clara in the garden, helping younger children with their homework. Her patient guidance with their mathematics questions echoed Gabriel's own teaching style, a genetic inheritance neither had known they shared. "She's stronger now," Catherine continued. "The therapy helped, and finding that photograph of you and Lucia gave her purpose. But she still carries deep wounds, Mr. Mendes, wounds that can't be healed with corporate efficiency or financial resources." Gabriel stood, moving to the window. He watched his daughter, this remarkable young woman who had survived abandonment, loss, and despair, yet still maintained the capacity for kindness. She looked up, sensing his gaze, and offered a smile that was pure Lucia. "The night Clara was admitted to the hospital," Catherine said quietly, "she kept repeating one thing: I just wanted him to see me. Just once. Just to know if I was worth staying for." The words struck Gabriel with physical force. He remembered his own words to Lucia that rainy night at Harvard: "I can't let anything distract me from success now." 2 decades later, the true cost of that success was laid bare in sterile medical terminology and therapy notes. "There's more," Catherine added, hesitating. "We found this in her room that night." She withdrew a crumpled newspaper clipping from the file, a profile of Gabriel from the Financial Times. Clara had circled a quote: "I've never regretted any decision I've made in pursuit of excellence." The irony of those words, juxtaposed against his daughter's pain, was devastating. Gabriel had built his reputation on perfect timing and flawless judgment. Yet he had missed the most crucial moment of all the night Lucia tried to tell him about their child. "She needs more than your presence now," Catherine advised. "She needs to know she has a permanent place in your life, that you won't walk away again when business calls." Gabriel touched the window glass, creating a momentary connection with his daughter's reflection. "How do I fix this?" he asked, his voice carrying an unfamiliar note of uncertainty. "Not with a corporate strategy," Catherine replied gently. "Start by being the father she needed 19 years ago. The rest will follow." In the garden, Clara had finished helping with homework and now sat alone on a bench, writing in her journal, another habit inherited from Lucia. The setting sun caught her profile, highlighting how perfectly she embodied both her parents, his determination tempered by her mother's compassion. Gabriel pulled out his phone, accessing the secure server where Mendes Corp's most crucial documents were stored. With a few quick commands, he began the process that would irrevocably change his life and his company's future. "Regina," he spoke into the phone, his voice carrying absolute certainty. "Cancel tomorrow's board meeting and contact our lawyers. It's time to rewrite the succession plan." The Mendes Corp press conference room had never been so crowded. Television cameras lined the back wall, reporters filled every seat, and the atmosphere crackled with anticipation. At precisely 9 a.m., Gabriel Mendes stepped to the podium, his appearance impeccable as always, but something in his bearing had changed. 20 years ago he began, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed room, "I made a decision that defined my life. I chose ambition over love, success over family, and numbers over human connection. Today I'm here to correct that mistake." The room erupted in camera flashes as he continued. "Effective immediately, I am stepping down as CEO of Mendes Corp to focus on what truly matters: my daughter, Clara, and the legacy of her mother, Lucia Martinez." Victoria Blackwood, seated in the front row, rose halfway from her chair before Gabriel's raised hand stopped her. "This isn't a negotiation, Victoria. For once, this isn't about market shares or quarterly projections." He withdrew Lucia's final letter from his pocket, the paper now worn from repeated reading. "My late partner wrote something profound about success," she said. "The true measure of wealth isn't in what you own, but in what owns your heart. I've spent 2 decades measuring the wrong kind of wealth." The announcement of his resignation sent immediate shockwaves through the financial markets. Stock tickers across the world began registering the impact as Mendes Corp shares plummeted. On the screens behind him, the numbers fell in real time, each decline representing millions in lost value. "Mr. Mendes," a reporter called out, "are you concerned about the impact on shareholders?" Gabriel smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his usually stern features. "But I've learned that some things can't be measured in market valuations. My daughter tried to take her own life 6 months ago, believing she wasn't worth enough for her father to stay. No amount of corporate success can justify that cost." The revelation silenced the room. In the doorway, Clara stood watching, her presence a quiet testimony to the truth of his words. She had insisted on being there, saying, "We face things together now, remember." "I'm not abandoning the company," Gabriel continued. "I'm transforming it. Effective immediately, Mendes Corp will establish the Lucia Martinez Foundation, dedicated to supporting single parents and reuniting separated families. 20% of our annual profits will fund this initiative." Victoria Blackwood's face had turned an alarming shade of pale. The board members present exchanged glances of barely concealed panic, but Gabriel wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I'm implementing comprehensive parental leave policies, on-site childcare facilities, and flexible working arrangements across all our operations. Success shouldn't require sacrificing family. I learned that lesson too late, but perhaps others won't have to." He gestured to Clara, who joined him at the podium. The resemblance between father and daughter was striking, their shared determination evident in their bearing. "This is my daughter, Clara Martinez Mendes. Not my heir, not a succession plan, but a remarkable young woman who has taught me more about strength and resilience in 3 weeks than I learned in 20 years of corporate leadership." Clara spoke next, her voice steady despite the pressure. "My mother always believed in second chances. She spent 19 years hoping my father would find his way back to what truly matters. Today he has." The questions came rapid fire. "What about the Taiwan merger? Will you maintain voting rights? Is this a temporary step back?" Gabriel raised his hand for silence. "I've spent my career calculating risks and returns, but some equations can't be balanced on a spreadsheet. Some choices are about the heart, not the bottom line." He looked directly into the cameras, speaking now to shareholders worldwide. "I built this company on the principle that everything of value can be measured. I was wrong. The most valuable things in life: love, family, redemption, defy calculation. Today, I choose to be a father first and a CEO second. The markets will adjust. My daughter cannot wait another day for her father to choose her. The press conference ended in chaos, but Gabriel and Clara walked out together, their heads held high. Behind them, the financial empire he'd built trembled on its foundation. Ahead of them lay an uncertain future, but one they would face as family. In the elevator, Clara squeezed his hand. "Mom would be proud," she said softly. Gabriel looked at their reflection in the polished doors. Father and daughter, together at last. "Yes," he replied. "I think she would." The fallout from Gabriel's resignation was immediate and far-reaching. Within hours, Mendy's Corp stock had dropped 30%, triggering circuit breakers and temporary trading halts. The financial media portrayed it as the billion-dollar choice, calculating the precise cost of choosing family over finance. In his private office, Gabriel methodically packed 2 decades of corporate life into a single box. Awards, accolades, and the trappings of success, each item now seemed to carry a different weight. Regina entered with the latest market reports and emergency board meeting minutes. "Sir, the institutional investors are demanding an emergency shareholders meeting," she reported. "The Taiwan merger team has officially withdrawn their offer, and 3 major clients have suspended their contracts pending leadership stabilization." Gabriel lifted a framed magazine cover, his first Forbes feature. Titled "The Man Who Never Makes Mistakes," he placed it carefully in the box, alongside Lucia's letters. "How much have we lost today, Regina?" "Approximately $4.2 billion in market capitalization," she answered, then hesitated before adding, "But you've gained something priceless." The elevator ride to the lobby felt different now. Employees stopped to watch as Gabriel Mendes, the man whose presence had once commanded immediate attention to spreadsheets and presentations, carried a single box of personal belongings. But instead of the usual fearful deference, their expressions held something new: respect. Outside, the media circus continued. Photographers captured the moment Gabriel placed the box in his Bentley's trunk. The images would appear in tomorrow's papers, symbolic of corporate America's shifting values. But it was another photograph that occupied his thoughts, the one of him and Lucia at Harvard, young and full of possibilities. Clara waited at Sunshine House, surrounded by supportive staff and fellow residents. The news had reached them too, and the younger children had made a banner "Welcome Home." Clara's dad, the simple words carried more weight than any corporate merger agreement he'd ever signed. "You didn't have to give up everything," Clara said softly as they sat in the garden where they'd first met. "Mom wouldn't have wanted that." Gabriel watched a group of children playing nearby, their laughter carrying across the courtyard. "I'm not giving up anything," he replied. "I'm finally claiming what matters most." His phone buzzed continuously with messages from board members, investors, and business partners. Each notification represented another fraction of his empire potentially crumbling. But for the first time in 20 years, the numbers didn't command his immediate attention. Catherine Morrison approached with afternoon tea, a knowing smile on her face. "The children have a request," she said. "They're hoping Mr. Mendes might help with math homework, since he's so good with numbers." The irony wasn't lost on him. The same skills he'd used to build a financial empire could now serve a different purpose. Clara watched as her father, still in his impeccable suit, sat down at a table surrounded by eager young faces clutching algebra worksheets. "See," she said to Catherine, "some calculations do add up perfectly." Later that evening, as father and daughter walked through Boston Common, Gabriel received one final call from Victoria Blackwood. The board had met in emergency session and reached a decision they would support his vision for the Lucia Martinez Foundation, but with conditions. His corporate expertise would still be required, but on his own terms. "They're afraid," Clara observed as he ended the call. "Not of losing money, but of losing the story. The public loves redemption narratives more than profit margins." Gabriel recognized Lucia's insight in their daughter's words. "Your mother once told me that true wealth creates more than it takes. I didn't understand then. I do now." The sun set over Boston, casting long shadows from Mendes Tower across the city. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, shareholders to appease, programs to implement, and most importantly, a relationship to build. But for the first time since that rainy night at Harvard, Gabriel Mendes felt truly rich. "Ready to go home?" he asked Clara, realizing they hadn't yet discussed living arrangements. She smiled Lucia's smile and took his arm. "We already are." The first sign of trouble came at dawn. Gabriel's security team reported unusual surveillance activity around both Mendes Tower and Sunshine House. Dark sedans with tinted windows had been circling the buildings throughout the night, their license plates traced to shell companies with obscure ownership. "There's more," Regina reported, her voice tense during their early morning call. "Someone's been accessing Clara's private records, medical files, school transcripts, everything. The digital footprint leads to private servers registered to Maxwell Wright." Gabriel's jaw tightened. Maxwell, his head of legal affairs, had access to the company's most sensitive information. If he had turned against them, the implications were serious. The morning's Financial Times carried the headline, "Mendes Empire in Crisis, Board Considers Hostile Action." The article detailed allegations of mental instability, questioning Gabriel's fitness to maintain any role in the company he'd built. Anonymous sources suggested his sudden focus on family matters indicated emotional manipulation by his newly discovered daughter. Victoria Blackwood had called an emergency shareholders meeting for that afternoon. The agenda, marked confidential, had leaked to the press: vote of no confidence in Gabriel Mendes, immediate suspension of voting rights, and potential legal action to protect corporate assets. "They're painting you as unstable," Clara observed, reading the coverage on her tablet during breakfast in his penthouse. "And me as a calculating gold digger who orchestrated this entire situation." Her voice remained steady, but Gabriel noticed her hands trembling slightly. "The board is scared," he replied, his strategic mind already mapping potential countermoves. "When people build their lives on pure logic, emotion becomes a threat. You and I represent everything they fear: the messiness of human connection, the priority of love over profit." His phone buzzed with an urgent message from Catherine Morrison's strange men asking questions at Sunshine House, claiming to be from child services, but credentials seemed suspicious. Clara's history being investigated. Before Gabriel could respond, Regina rushed into the dining room, her usual composure shattered. "Sir, they're moving faster than we anticipated. Maxwell has filed an emergency petition questioning Clara's paternity. They're demanding immediate DNA testing and a freeze on all your assets pending investigation." Clara set down her fork, her expression a perfect blend of his determination and Lucia's grace under pressure. "They're trying to separate us," she said quietly, "using the same corporate tactics you taught them." Gabriel reached across the table, taking his daughter's hand. The gesture felt both foreign and natural, like a long-forgotten language suddenly remembered. "I spent 20 years teaching them how to win at all costs," he acknowledged. "Now they're using those lessons against us." His phone erupted with notifications: stock prices plummeting, international partners withdrawing, media requests flooding in. The empire he'd built was under siege, its foundations shaken not by market forces or competition, but by the simple power of a father choosing his daughter. "Mr. Mendes," Regina interrupted, her face pale. "The board has called an immediate press conference. Victoria Blackwood is prepared to announce temporary assumption of CEO duties, citing concerns about mental competency and emotional manipulation." The irony wasn't lost on him. The very qualities that had made him a corporate success, ruthless focus, emotional detachment, prioritizing results over relationships, were now being used to paint him as unstable when he finally chose to be human. Clara stood, moving to the window that overlooked the city they both called home. "Do you regret it?" she asked, not turning around. "Choosing me over them?" Gabriel joined her at the window, seeing their reflections overlaid against the Boston skyline, father and daughter, so alike in their bearing, finally united despite everything conspiring to keep them apart. 20 years ago, he replied, I made a choice that seemed logical at the time. I chose ambition over love, certainty over possibility. Today they're asking me to make the same choice again. He turned to face his daughter directly. I won't make the same mistake twice. His phone rang again, Victoria Blackwood's number. On the street below, news vans were already gathering. The board's press conference would begin in an hour, potentially destroying everything he'd built. But as he watched Clara, her strength, her grace, her perfect blend of his determination and Lucia's compassion, Gabriel Mendes realized that some battles were worth losing if it meant winning what truly mattered. Victoria Blackwood stood at the podium in Mendes Corp's press conference room, her steel-grey hair immaculate, her expression grave. Behind her, a digital display showed the company's plummeting stock price in real time. It is with deep regret that the board of directors announces an emergency intervention in Mendes Corp's leadership, she began. Recent events have raised serious concerns about Mr. Mendes' decision-making capacity and potential manipulation by outside influences. The assembled press corps leaned forward, cameras flashing. Maxwell Wright stepped up beside her, holding a thick folder of documents. Our investigation has uncovered disturbing patterns of behavior, he announced. Mr. Mendes has diverted substantial corporate resources for personal matters, violated fiduciary responsibilities, and demonstrated emotional instability inconsistent with his role as CEO. In the back of the room, Regina watched with growing horror as the betrayal unfolded. The board members she'd worked alongside for years now presented a united front against the man who had built their success. Maxwell continued, his voice carrying practiced concern. Furthermore, we have reason to question the legitimacy of the claimed father-daughter relationship. Our investigation suggests potential fraud and conspiracy to manipulate corporate control. The doors burst open. Gabriel Mendes entered, Clara at his side. The room fell silent, cameras swiveling to capture the confrontation. Father and daughter moved forward with identical determination, their synchronized stride a living proof of their connection. Fraud and conspiracy, Gabriel's voice carried the quiet authority that had closed billion-dollar deals. Shall we discuss the real conspiracy, Maxwell? The one involving unauthorized access to private medical records? Or perhaps the falsified child services investigation at Sunshine House? Victoria stepped forward, attempting damage control. Gabriel, please, don't make this more difficult than necessary. Think of the shareholders. The shareholders, Clara spoke up, her voice clear and steady. You mean the same shareholders who've profited from my father's 20 years of sacrifice, who built their fortunes on the time he should have spent with his family. Gabriel reached into his briefcase, withdrawing a set of documents. Before you continue this performance, Victoria, you should know that Regina has been quite thorough in documenting the board's recent activities, including your midnight meeting with Conrad Thompson of rival Pierce Industries. Victoria's composure cracked slightly. The mentioned meeting had been completely secret, or so she'd thought. A hostile takeover, Gabriel continued, addressing the press directly. Orchestrated by those I trusted most, they hoped to use my reunion with Clara as proof of instability, allowing them to seize control and sell to our biggest competitor. Maxwell attempted to interrupt, but Gabriel raised his hand, the same gesture that had silenced boardrooms for decades. But they miscalculated. They assumed Clara was my weakness, when in fact she is my strength. Clara stepped to the podium, her poise remarkable under the circumstances. My mother, Lucia Martinez, taught literature at Boston public schools for 15 years. She believed that every story has a moral. The moral here is simple: when you build an empire on emotional detachment, don't be surprised when that detachment turns against you. The reporters scribbled frantically as Gabriel distributed copies of Regina's evidence. Each page documented the board's secret meetings, unauthorized investigations, and corporate espionage, all aimed at using his newfound humanity as a weapon against him. "I taught you too well," Gabriel addressed his board directly. "The art of the hostile takeover, the strategic elimination of emotional variables, the prioritization of profit over people. You learned every lesson except the most important one: some things are worth more than money." Victoria's face had turned ashen as she realized the extent of Regina's documentation. The carefully orchestrated coup was unraveling in front of the international press. The shareholders will decide. She attempted one final defense. They understand the importance of stable, emotionless leadership. "Yes, they will decide," Gabriel agreed. "Between leaders who view humanity as a weakness and those who recognize it as our greatest strength. Between those who hide behind corporate protocol and those who stand openly before them, acknowledging both their mistakes and their determination to correct them." He turned to the cameras, his arm around Clara's shoulders. 20 years ago, I chose wrong. I built an empire on the foundation of that mistake. Today, I choose differently. Let the shareholders decide which version of success they believe in." The press conference dissolved into chaos, but father and daughter stood firm, their united presence a testament to the truth Victoria and her conspirators had failed to understand: some bonds transcend corporate calculation. The aftermath of the press conference reverberated through Boston's financial district with seismic force. Inside Mendes Tower's executive suite, Gabriel and Clara faced the full consequences of their public stand against the board's attempted coup. "The shareholders' meeting is scheduled for tomorrow morning," Regina reported, organizing the mounting crisis documents. Initial polling suggests a near-even split. The institutional investors favor Victoria's stability narrative, but the family-owned voting blocs are responding to your message about values and legacy. Gabriel stood at his office window, watching the media trucks congregate below. The afternoon sun caught the glass facades of surrounding buildings, each one a mirror reflecting the empire he'd built and might lose. "What's our current position?" "Pierce Industries has increased their hostile takeover offer by 30%, Regina continued. They're positioning themselves as a stabilizing force in the market. Victoria and Maxwell are backing their bid, promising minimal disruption to operations." Clara, who had been studying the shareholder documents with her father's focused intensity, looked up. "They're using your own acquisition strategies against you, promising stability while preparing to dismantle everything you've built." The foundation, Gabriel realized, turning from the window. "They'll shut down the Lucia Martinez Foundation before it even launches. All those families we planned to help." 342 families, Clara specified, her voice carrying Lucia's compassion. "Single parents, separated children, people who need exactly what we missed out on for 20 years. We can't let them take that away." The intercom buzzed. Catherine Morrison's voice carried unusual urgency. "Mr. Mendes, there's something you need to see. Both of you. Now." At Sunshine House, Catherine waited in her office, a manila envelope on her desk. This arrived an hour ago. No return address, but the security footage shows the courier came from Mendes Tower. Inside the envelope, they found photographs spanning 2 decades, surveillance images of Lucia throughout the years. Her teaching at Boston public schools, shopping at local markets, always alone, always watched. The final image showed her car on the night of the accident, followed by a black sedan with tinted windows. "They knew," Clara whispered, her hands trembling as she held the photos. "All those years they knew about me, about Mom. They kept us apart deliberately." Gabriel's corporate mask cracked completely. The implications struck him with physical force. His own security team, operating under board directives, had monitored Lucia for years. Had they reported her attempts to reach him? Had they? "The accident," he said hoarsely. "Was it really an accident?" Catherine produced one final document, a private investigator's report, dated the day before Lucia's fatal crash. Surveillance subject appears determined to breach corporate security protocols. recommend immediate intervention to protect company interests. But the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Gabriel steadied himself against Catherine's desk, 20 years of corporate decisions taking on horrifying new context. Had his obsession with control, with perfect information, led to this? Had the machine he built ultimately caused Lucia's death? Clara stood, her movement drawing both adults' attention. In her bearing they saw something new, not just Gabriel's determination or Lucia's compassion, but a strength entirely her own. Tomorrow isn't just about corporate control anymore, she declared. It's about justice. For Mum. For every family torn apart by the idea that success means sacrificing love. Gabriel looked at his daughter, seeing for the first time not just what he'd lost, but what he might still save. The shareholders need to know, all of it. No more corporate facades, no more perfect narratives. They'll destroy you, Catherine warned. Everything you've built. No, Clara interrupted, taking her father's hand. They'll try to destroy us. But Mom always said the strongest foundations aren't built on fear or control. They're built on truth. Gabriel squared his shoulders, the weight of 20 years of mistakes pressing against him. Tomorrow's shareholders' meeting wouldn't just decide the fate of his company. It would determine whether corporate power could continue to separate families, whether profit would forever triumph over love. Regina, he spoke into his phone, his voice carrying new purpose. Call every reporter who was at the press conference. Tell them we have a story about corporate surveillance, family separation, and the true cost of success. And contact our lawyers, all of them. It's time to bring everything into the light. As they left Sunshine House, the setting sun cast long shadows across Boston. Tomorrow would bring either triumph or total loss, but for the first time in his career, Gabriel Mendez wasn't calculating odds or planning contingencies. Some battles were worth fighting, regardless of the cost. The shareholders' meeting began at precisely 9 a.m. in Mendez Tower's Grand Conference Center. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating rows of anxious investors and board members. Gabriel and Clara stood together at the podium, their evidence arranged before them with methodical precision. As Gabriel began presenting the surveillance documentation, Victoria Blackwood's phone buzzed quietly. She glanced at the message, and a subtle smile crossed her face. Moments later, Maxwell Wright slipped out of the room, unnoticed by most in the audience. Gabriel was midway through explaining the corporate surveillance program when Regina burst through the doors, her composure completely shattered. "Sir, there's been a breach. Someone's accessing everything: personal servers, private accounts, family trusts. They're draining it all." The projection screen behind him suddenly flickered to life, displaying real-time transfers from Mendez Corp's accounts. Millions vanished in seconds, redirected through a labyrinth of offshore entities. The corporate safeguards Gabriel had built over decades crumbled like sand castles before a rising tide. "A precise operation," Victoria commented, standing. Almost as if someone had intimate knowledge of our security protocols, someone who perhaps designed them himself. She turned to the shareholders. "Is this the stable leadership you want? A man so focused on family drama that he neglects basic corporate security?" Gabriel's hands flew across his tablet, attempting to halt the financial hemorrhage. But each firewall he erected was countered with protocols he himself had created. His own security system turned against him with surgical precision. "The Lucia Martinez Foundation endowment," Clara gasped, watching the numbers drop. "They're taking everything, even the funds for the families we promised to help." The shareholders murmured as they witnessed their investments evaporating. Victoria seized the moment, stepping to the podium. "We tried to prevent this. We saw the signs of instability, the emotional compromise. Pierce Industries stands ready to step in, to restore order and protect what remains of shareholder value." Gabriel worked frantically to stop the bleeding, but 20 years of accumulated wealth, personal and corporate, vanished in minutes. The empire he'd built, meant to secure his daughter's future and help other families, dissolved into digital ether. Dad, Clara's voice cut through his concentration. Look. On the screen, one final transaction appeared, the complete emptying of a trust fund he'd established the day he met Clara. But it wasn't the money that made his blood run cold. It was the recipient account named Martinez Estate Management. Quite fitting, Victoria observed. Everything you built trying to forget Lucia Martinez now returned to her name. Of course, as court-appointed trustees, we'll ensure these funds are managed appropriately. The shareholders' voices rose in anger and panic. Gabriel stood at the podium, watching 20 years of power and influence slip away. But when he looked at Clara, he saw not defeat, but a fierce determination that mirrored his own. You think this breaks us? Clara addressed Victoria directly, her voice carrying Lucia's strength. You think money is what makes a family? My mother raised me on a teacher's salary, but I was rich in everything that mattered. Gabriel straightened his tie, a gesture of composure he'd practiced thousands of times. You've taken the fortune, he acknowledged, but you've forgotten what truly builds an empire, people. As if on cue, Regina stepped forward, followed by dozens of Mendes Corp employees. We've worked with Mr. Mendes for years, she announced. We've seen him at his most ruthless, and recently at his most human. We choose the latter. Victoria's smile faltered as more employees stood, forming a wall behind Gabriel and Clara. The shareholders watched, witnessing not just a corporate power struggle, but a fundamental clash of values. The money is gone, Gabriel addressed the room, but the truth remains, and so does our commitment to every family we promised to help. He turned to Clara, seeing in her face the same resolution he'd once seen in Lucia's. They had lost everything material, but standing together, father and daughter against the world, they had never been richer in what truly mattered. Well, Victoria's voice carried practiced concern. I believe this demonstrates the need for immediate leadership change. Shall we proceed with the vote? The shareholder vote was interrupted by an unexpected arrival. Catherine Morrison entered the conference center, accompanied by an elderly woman whose presence caused Clara to gasp audibly. Maria Martinez, Lucia's mother, walked slowly to the podium, carrying a weathered leather briefcase. Before this vote proceeds, Maria announced, her voice trembling but determined, there are things you need to know, things I've kept hidden for 20 years, out of shame and misplaced loyalty. Victoria attempted to interrupt, but the shareholders' attention had shifted entirely to this new development. Maria opened the briefcase, removing a stack of documents that bore the Mendes Corp letterhead. In 2004, when Lucia discovered she was pregnant, she didn't just try to tell Gabriel, Maria continued. She wrote to the board of directors, believing they would help her reach him. I intercepted those letters, convinced by certain board members that silence would be generously compensated. The room fell silent as Maria placed the original letters on the podium. They offered me a choice: financial security for my family, or the truth for my daughter. I chose wrong. Her eyes met Gabriel's. I betrayed not only Lucia, but also the granddaughter I never allowed myself to know. Clara stepped forward, her hand finding her grandmother's. The physical resemblance to Lucia was even more striking with them side by side. Why now? She asked softly. Because I watched my daughter die, still believing in the goodness of people, Maria replied. And now I'm watching the same forces that separated our family try to do it again. Gabriel stood motionless, understanding dawning in his eyes. The surveillance, the accident, it wasn't just corporate protocol, was it? Maria withdrew one final document, a contract dated 2004, bearing Victoria Blackwood's signature. It detailed the terms of the Martinez family's silence, including provisions for active monitoring and intervention if necessary. I signed away my daughter's happiness, Maria's voice broke, and ultimately her life. The night of the accident, she'd discovered this contract in my papers. She was driving to Mendes Tower, finally understanding why her attempts to reach Gabriel had always failed. Victoria's composed facade cracked slightly. This is ancient history, irrelevant to today's vote. is it Gabriel addressed the shareholders directly. The same board members who orchestrated my separation from Lucia and Clara now claim to have the company's best interests at heart. They speak of stability while building success on broken families. The financial screen still displayed the devastating losses, but something had shifted in the room. The employees who had stood behind Gabriel and Clara were joined by others, creating a visible demonstration of support. Maria turned to her granddaughter, tears flowing freely now. Lucia kept every article about your father, every news clipping of his success. She never stopped believing that someday truth would matter more than money. Clara embraced her grandmother, 2 decades of separation beginning to heal. Mom was right, she said, addressing the shareholders. The truth does matter more. Every family separated by corporate greed, every child who grows up wondering why success had to mean sacrifice, they deserve better. Gabriel watched his daughter and her grandmother, seeing echoes of Lucia in their reconciliation. He had lost his fortune, his company teetered on the brink, but witnessing this moment of healing made everything else seem insignificant. The vote before you isn't about quarterly profits or market stability, he declared. It's about what kind of company we want to be, one that builds walls between families in the name of success, or one that recognizes that true wealth lies in human connection. Victoria stepped forward, her voice sharp, touching sentiments. But business isn't about sentiment. The billions lost today prove that emotional leadership is a liability. No, Maria interrupted, standing straighter despite her age. The billions lost today prove that when you build an empire on separated families and buried truths, eventually the cost comes due. The shareholders whispered among themselves, measuring financial losses against moral gains. The vote that would decide Mendy's corp's future loomed, but in that moment, watching his daughter stand between her grandmother and the future they could build together, Gabriel knew he had already won something far more valuable than corporate control. The shareholder vote loomed just minutes away when Regina burst into the conference room once again, clutching a tablet with trembling hands. "Sir, you need to see this immediately." On the screen, a final transaction was processing the last remaining asset in Gabriel's personal portfolio, his controlling stake in Mendy's Corp itself. The shares were being systematically transferred to an anonymous holding company, using authentication codes that only Gabriel possessed. "Impossible," he breathed, recognizing the digital signature. "Those codes were stored in my private vault." "Which was designed by our security team," Victoria interjected smoothly. "The same team that kept such diligent watch over MS Martinez all those years. Did you really think we wouldn't maintain backdoor access to every system you built?" The transaction completed with brutal finality. Gabriel Mendez, the man who had built an empire from nothing, now owned not a single share in his own company. The screens displayed the new ownership structure, showing Pierce Industries as the majority shareholder. Clara watched the numbers change, understanding the magnitude of what had just happened. They didn't just take your money, she realized. They took your legacy, everything you built. "Not everything," Gabriel replied, his voice carrying new strength. He turned to address the shareholders directly. 20 years ago, I chose the wrong legacy. I built this company believing that success meant control, that vulnerability was weakness. I was wrong." Victoria stepped forward, triumph evident in her bearing. "This is no longer your company, Gabriel. The vote is unnecessary. Pierce Industries now holds controlling interest." "The shares," yes, Gabriel acknowledged. "But a company is more than its stock certificates. It's the people who build it, the values that guide it, the promises it keeps." As if on cue, Regina began distributing documents to the shareholders' employee resignation letters, hundreds of them, all effective immediately. The company's top talents, its most valuable assets, stood united behind Gabriel and Clara. "You can take the company," Regina announced, her loyalty unwavering. "But you can't force us to run it. Every key employee in this room has already received multiple offers from your competitors. We choose to follow leadership that values humanity over profit." Victoria's composure cracked as she realized the implications. Pierce Industries might own Mendes Corp, but without its key personnel, the acquisition would be meaningless. The empire she had conspired to seize would collapse without its human foundation. Maria Martinez stepped forward, placing her hand on Clara's shoulder. "My daughter died trying to bridge the gap between love and ambition. In her memory, we offer you one last choice, Victoria, not between profit and loss, but between perpetuating broken systems and healing them." Gabriel removed his tie, the final symbol of his corporate armor, and placed it on the podium. "I built this company on the belief that everything valuable could be measured and controlled. Today I stand before you with nothing material left to lose, but more wealth than I've ever known." He looked at Clara, seeing in her face everything he'd nearly lost forever. "My daughter taught me that true legacy isn't measured in market shares or quarterly profits. It's measured in lives touched, families united, and truths honored." The shareholders watched in stunned silence as Gabriel Mendes, the man who had never shown weakness, wrapped his arm around his daughter's shoulders. The gesture carried more power than any corporate mandate. "So take the company," he concluded. "But know this, every family separated by corporate greed, every child who grows up wondering why success had to mean sacrifice, they will find their way to the truth. And when they do, they'll remember which side of history you chose to stand on." Victoria's victory smile faded as she surveyed the room. The employees she'd hoped to inherit stood firmly with their former CEO. The human capital that made Mendes Corp valuable was choosing a different kind of wealth. In that moment, as the morning sun streamed through the conference room windows, the true cost of victory and defeat became clear. Gabriel had lost everything he'd spent 20 years building, but in that loss, he'd finally found what Lucia had tried to show him so long ago: some forms of wealth can't be stolen, because they live in the heart. Clara squeezed her father's hand, her voice carrying Lucia's gentle wisdom. "Mum always said that sometimes you have to lose everything to find what really matters." The boardroom at Pierce Industries fell silent as the electronic doors slid open. Victoria Blackwood strode in, her victory smile fading at the sight that greeted her. The entire executive team of Mendes Corp sat around the conference table, led by James Pierce himself, their expressions grave. "I assume you're here for the transfer paperwork," James began, his tone carefully measured. "But there have been some developments you should be aware of." He gestured to a stack of internal audit reports spread across the mahogany table. Each bore the distinctive red stamp of the Securities and Exchange Commission. "Your team was thorough in transferring control from Mendes Corp," he continued. "Perhaps too thorough." Regina, still wearing her Mendes Corp badge, stepped forward with a tablet displaying transaction records. The authentication codes used to access Gabriel's private accounts. They left digital fingerprints. Every backdoor, every override, every intervention over the past 20 years, all traceable to board-authorized operations. Victoria's composed facade cracked slightly as she scanned the documents. The systematic surveillance of Lucia Martinez, the intercepted communications, the orchestrated financial isolation, all meticulously documented in corporate records she'd thought permanently sealed. "More concerning," James added, "are the irregularities surrounding Lucia Martinez's accident. The black sedan that followed her that night was registered to a subsidiary of your private security firm. The traffic camera footage, which mysteriously disappeared from city records, was archived in your corporate servers." Victoria sank into a chair, her corporate armor finally showing fatal cracks. "We were protecting the company's interests. Everything we did was legal." "Legal," Regina interrupted, her voice sharp with 2 decades of accumulated loyalty. "Was it legal to use corporate resources to systematically separate a father from his child? To monitor a private citizen for 20 years? To create circumstances that led to a woman's death?" The morning sun cast harsh shadows across the boardroom as James Pierce stood. "The Pierce Industries board has voted unanimously to withdraw from the Mendes Corp acquisition. The reputational risk alone." He shook his head. But more importantly, we refuse to profit from the systematic destruction of a family. Victoria's phone buzzed insistently messages from other board members, shareholders, legal counsel. The empire she'd orchestrated was unraveling thread by thread. Gabriel Mendes built his company on precision and control, James continued. But you built your power on secrets and separation. The difference is crucial. Regina placed a final document on the table, a federal investigation notice. The authorities are particularly interested in the surveillance program. 20 years of corporate espionage, all documented in your meticulous records. Victoria stared at the papers, seeing her carefully constructed world collapse. Where is Gabriel now? At Harvard, Regina replied, a slight smile touching her lips. With Clara and Maria, they're visiting the library where it all began. Some stories need to return to their beginning before they can find their proper ending. The sunlight caught the edge of the SEC documents, highlighting key phrases: criminal investigation, corporate malfeasance, obstruction of justice. The very precision that had made Victoria's schemes effective now provided evidence of their systematic nature. The employees you hope to inherit, Regina added, they're already establishing a new venture. The Lucia Martinez Foundation will operate independently, funded by private donors who believe in its mission. Sometimes, losing everything material reveals what's truly valuable. Victoria stood, her legendary composure finally shattered. We were building an empire. Everything we did was for the company's stability. No, James corrected firmly. You were destroying lives in the name of corporate interests. There's a difference. Gabriel Mendes may have lost his company, but he's gained something far more precious. You've lost both. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Mendes Tower stood against the Boston skyline, a monument to ambition and control. But now its shadow seemed less imposing, its gleaming facade unable to hide the human cost of its construction. The authorities will want to speak with you, Regina stated calmly. About Lucia's accident, the surveillance program, everything. For once, Victoria, you'll have to face the human consequences of your perfect corporate calculations. As Victoria Blackwood left Pierce Industries headquarters, her power and influence evaporating with each step, she finally understood what Gabriel had learned through Clara. Some forms of wealth can't be acquired through corporate maneuvering, and some losses can't be measured in market shares. Harvard's historic library stood unchanged by the decades, its weathered brick walls holding memories like pressed flowers between pages. Gabriel, Clara, and Maria Martinez walked through the familiar corridors until they reached table 23, third chair from the left. This is where I first met your mother, Gabriel explained, touching the worn wooden surface. She insisted it was her designated study spot. I was too focused on economics to appreciate the poetry of that moment. Through the library's tall windows, afternoon sunlight created the same patterns it had 20 years ago. Clara sat in her mother's chair, opening Lucia's diary to a marked page. She wrote about this place often, like it was sacred ground. Maria withdrew an envelope from her handbag, her hands trembling slightly. I found this in Lucia's teaching desk after the accident. She'd written it the day she discovered the surveillance contract in my papers. The letter, written in Lucia's distinctive hand, was addressed to both Gabriel and Clara. My dearest loves. If you're reading this, then the truth has finally emerged. Mother's confession about the board's involvement explains so much: the returned letters, the disconnected phone calls, the way my attempts to reach Gabriel always seem to meet invisible walls. But knowing why doesn't change what matters most. Clara, your father isn't the man they made him appear to be. The Gabriel I knew had a heart as vast as his ambitions. The corporate world may have buried that heart, but I believe it still beats. Gabriel, our daughter, has your determination and my hope. In her I see the perfect balance of dreams and reality that we once thought we'd found together. She'll need both to face what's coming. The board's surveillance contract reveals how far they'll go to maintain control. But their perfect corporate machine has one fatal flaw: it can't account for love. Use that weakness. Let it be your strength. With eternal love. Lucia. Regina arrived as they finished reading, carrying news from Pierce Industries. Victoria's facing federal investigation. The surveillance program, the corporate espionage, everything's unraveling. But there's more. She handed Gabriel a tablet displaying messages from former Mendes Corp employees. Hundreds had resigned, refusing to work under Pierce Industries' acquisition. Instead, they were pledging support for a new venture. They want to help build the Lucia Martinez Foundation, Regina explained. Not as a corporate charity, but as an independent organization dedicated to reuniting separated families and fighting systematic family separation in corporate America. Clara looked up from her mother's diary. Mom's last lecture at Boston Public Schools was about Phoenix mythology, how new life rises from apparent destruction. She believed in renewal through loss. Gabriel stood by the library window, watching students cross the Harvard yard just as he and Lucia had done 2 decades ago. I spent 20 years building walls of wealth and control, never realizing I was walling myself off from what mattered most. Maria touched her granddaughter's hand, seeing Lucia in every gesture. My daughter believed that love finds its way through any barrier, even the ones we build ourselves. The afternoon sun caught the edges of Lucia's letter, illuminating her words about love's power to overcome corporate calculation. In that moment, surrounded by the ghosts of past choices and the promise of future redemption, Gabriel understood what his former board had never grasped: true wealth couldn't be locked in vaults or measured in market shares. The foundation, he said, turning to face his family, will be our new legacy. Not built on separation and control, but on reunion and healing. Every family torn apart by corporate greed deserves their own second chance. Regina smiled, her tablet displaying more messages of support. The employees aren't just pledging their time. They're investing their savings, their expertise, their networks. They believe in this mission. Clara stood, carrying herself with the same quiet strength that had characterized Lucia. Then we'll build something new, not an empire of glass and steel, but a network of hope and healing, starting right here, where it all began. All through the library windows, Boston's financial district glittered in the distance. Mendes Tower stood among them, but its shadow no longer seemed to reach quite so far. In its place, something new was rising, not from corporate strategy or market manipulation, but from the simple power of truth and love finally breaking through decades of carefully constructed walls. The announcement of the Lucia Martinez Foundation's establishment made headlines across Boston, but not in the financial pages. Instead, it appeared in human interest stories, education sections, and community news. The narrative had shifted from corporate power to human potential. In the renovated Victorian mansion that once housed Sunshine House Orphanage, Gabriel stood before a gathering of former Mendes Corp employees, community leaders, and families seeking reunion. The building's transformation into the foundation's headquarters seemed fitting, a place of separation becoming a center for reunion. 20 years ago, Gabriel began, his voice carrying to every corner of the restored parlor. I made a decision based on corporate logic that defied human wisdom. Today, we begin the work of correcting not just my mistake, but a system that forces countless others to make similar choices. Clara, standing beside him at the podium, continued with practiced grace. My mother believed that education could bridge any divide. That's why the Foundation's first initiative focuses on corporate reform through human connection. We're partnering with business schools to include family impact assessments in every major corporate decision. Regina presented the Foundation's initial projects: a legal aid network for families separated by corporate policies, scholarship programs for children of single parents, and corporate culture consultancy focusing on family-friendly practices. The former Mendes Corp employees had reorganized their expertise around human needs rather than profit margins. Maria Martinez, now serving as the Foundation's senior advisor, shared her perspective: when corporations evaluate success solely through financial metrics, they miss the true cost of their decisions. Every family separated by corporate demands represents a failure of human values, not a triumph of business efficiency. The afternoon's presentations included testimonials from families already benefiting from the Foundation's work. A single mother pursuing an executive MBA while receiving childcare support. A father reconnecting with his children after corporate demands had driven them apart. Each story reflected the change Gabriel and Clara sought to create. The Foundation operates on a principle Lucia taught in her literature classes, Clara explained, referencing her mother's teaching notes. Every story of separation contains within it the seeds of reunion. Our role is to nurture those seeds, to help them grow through the cracks in corporate walls. As the presentation concluded, James Pierce himself approached the podium. His presence caused a stir. The corporate titan, who had withdrawn from the Mendes Corp acquisition, now stood ready to support its spiritual successor. What Gabriel and Clara have created here, James announced, represents the future of business leadership. Not the sterile pursuit of profit at any cost, but the recognition that human connection drives sustainable success. Pierce Industries is proud to be the Foundation's first corporate partner in promoting family-friendly business practices. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The very takeover that had threatened to destroy Gabriel's legacy had instead helped birth something more meaningful. The Foundation's work would reach far beyond what Mendes Corp could have achieved through traditional corporate philanthropy. Gabriel watched as Clara led a workshop on corporate culture transformation, her insights blending his business acumen with Lucia's humanitarian vision. In her poised delivery and compassionate approach, he saw the best of both her parents, refined into something uniquely powerful. Lucia would be proud, Maria whispered, joining him at the back of the room. Not just of what you've built, but of who you've become. Regina approached with the latest registration numbers, hundreds of companies seeking guidance on balancing corporate success with family values. The Foundation's message had struck a chord in Boston's business community, suggesting that change was possible even in the most traditional sectors. As evening fell, Gabriel found himself in what had once been Sunshine House's garden. The space now featured a memorial to Lucia, not a corporate monument of steel and glass, but a living tribute of her favorite flowers and a small library for children. Clara joined him there, carrying her mother's diary and a stack of registration forms from the day's event. Mom wrote that true wealth grows when shared, she said, settling beside him on a bench. I think we're finally understanding what she meant. The garden's newly installed lights illuminated the path forward, both literally and metaphorically. The Foundation's work was just beginning, but its impact already suggested a fundamental shift in how success could be measured and achieved. We lost an empire, Gabriel reflected, watching the city lights emerge against the darkening sky, but we've gained a mission. Your mother would say that's a fair trade. Clara smiled Lucia's smile and opened the diary to a fresh page. Then let's make sure it's worth it. We have more families to help, more stories to change. The Boston family court presented a markedly different atmosphere from the corporate boardrooms where Gabriel had spent his career. But Judge Eleanor Richardson studied the documents before her with careful attention, occasionally glancing at the assembled parties: Gabriel, Clara, Maria Martinez, and representatives from the Lucia Martinez Foundation. This is an unusual case, Judge Richardson began, adjusting her reading glasses. We have a biological father seeking to formalize custody of an adult daughter, while simultaneously establishing a trust to support other families facing similar separations. The legal precedent here is complex. The morning sunlight filtered through the courthouse's historic windows, casting a warm glow on the proceedings. Gabriel stood, his posture reflecting both corporate precision and newfound humility. Your Honor, 19 years ago, I made a decision that separated me from my daughter and her mother. Today, we're not just seeking to formalize our reunion, but to create a framework that prevents other families from facing similar choices. Clara presented the foundation's initial results: 30 families reunited, 50 corporate policy reforms initiated, and a groundbreaking partnership with Harvard Business School to integrate family impact assessments into corporate leadership training. The foundation isn't just about healing past wounds, Clara explained, her voice carrying Lucia's teaching cadence. It's about transforming how businesses view success. Every policy we change potentially affects thousands of families. Judge Richardson reviewed the trust documentation with particular interest. The legal structure ensured that the foundation's resources would be permanently dedicated to family reunification and corporate reform, regardless of future business pressures. Ms. Martinez, the judge, addressed Clara directly. As an adult, your consent to this arrangement carries significant weight. What are your thoughts on formalizing these relationships now? Clara stood, her bearing reflecting both her father's confidence and her mother's grace. Your Honor, my mother believed that timing was everything. 20 years ago, corporate ambition separated our family. Today, that same determination to succeed is being channeled into reuniting others. Maria Martinez provided testimony about the systematic corporate interference that had kept father and daughter apart. The judge's expression grew grave as she reviewed the evidence of surveillance and intervention. What strikes me, Judge Richardson observed, is how this case exemplifies both the problem and its solution. Mr. Mendez, you built a corporate empire that inadvertently contributed to family separations. Now you're using that same business acumen to repair such damages. The courtroom fell silent as the judge made her final review. Gabriel reached for Clara's hand, the gesture now natural where once it would have seemed foreign. Maria watched them, seeing in their connection the fulfillment of Lucia's deepest hopes. The court finds compelling reasons to support this arrangement, Judge Richardson announced. The formal recognition of the father-daughter relationship, combined with the Foundation's broader mission, serves both private and public interests. She signed the documents with deliberate care, each stroke of her pen formalizing what love and determination had already built. However, she added, looking up, I'm adding a condition. The Foundation must maintain its independence from corporate influence. Its mission of family reunification must remain paramount. Your Honor, Gabriel responded, that aligns perfectly with our intentions. My daughter taught me that true success isn't measured in corporate acquisitions, but in families restored. As they left the courthouse, reporters gathered on the steps sought comment. The story had evolved from corporate scandal to something more profound, a narrative of redemption and systemic change. Clara addressed the media with natural authority. Today isn't just about formalizing our family, it's about acknowledging that corporate success shouldn't require family sacrifice. The Foundation exists to prove that these two aspects of life can and should support each other. Regina waited by the car, holding updated Foundation statistics. More companies were adopting family impact assessments, and a growing number of corporate leaders were seeking guidance on balancing ambition with family connections. Lucia would have appreciated the symmetry, Maria remarked as they drove away from the courthouse. The same determination that once built walls is now opening doors for others. Gabriel watched the city scroll past, seeing it through new eyes. Each office tower represented not just business opportunities, but families affected by corporate decisions. The Foundation's work was transforming how that influence could be wielded. The legal recognition is important, Clara said, reviewing the court documents, but the real work continues. Every family we help reunite carries forward Mom's belief that love eventually finds its way through any barrier. The car turned toward the Foundation's headquarters, where more families waited for assistance. The day's legal victories were just one step in a longer journey of transformation, personal, professional, and societal. The Ramirez family gathering took place at their traditional Sunday dinner, a custom that had endured through 2 decades of family fracture. The modest home in Cambridge filled with the aroma of Maria's signature paella, a recipe Lucia had once promised to teach Clara. Gabriel and Clara arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, carrying photographs from the Foundation's recent successes and legal documents from the court proceedings. Miguel Ramirez, Lucia's brother, opened the door with measured courtesy that reflected years of complicated emotions. "Welcome to our home," Miguel stated formally, his eyes lingering on Clara's face, where Lucia's features were most evident. "Maria has been cooking since dawn. Some traditions never change." The dining room told the story of the Martinez-Ramirez family through carefully arranged photographs. Lucia's presence dominated one wall, her images tracking from childhood through her teaching career. A conspicuous gap marked the Harvard years, when Gabriel had been part of her life. "We've brought something to fill that space," Clara said, presenting a photograph from her mother's diary. The image showed Lucia and Gabriel at Harvard's library, both laughing as autumn leaves swirled around them. "Mom would want the whole story told, not just the parts we found comfortable." Maria emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. The weeks since her court testimony had softened the edges of her guilt, though her movements still carried the weight of past decisions. "I've set a place for everyone," she said, emphasizing the word everyone with quiet significance. But during dinner, Gabriel observed the family dynamics with his trained analytical eye. Miguel's wife, Elena, gently steered conversation toward neutral topics when tensions threatened to rise. Their teenage children watched Clara with undisguised curiosity, seeing in their cousin a connection to the aunt they'd never known. "The Foundation has helped 30 families this month," Clara shared, carefully serving her grandmother's parlor. "Each case teaches us something new about how corporate policies affect family bonds." Miguel set down his fork, addressing Gabriel directly for the first time. "You understand, don't you, why we resisted at first? We watched Lucia suffer for years, trying to breach the walls your company built." "I understand," Gabriel replied, his corporate polish giving way to genuine remorse. "And I understand that rebuilding trust takes more than corporate efficiency or legal documents." Maria reached for the folder of Foundation documents, reviewing the family support programs with tears in her eyes. Lucia always said that education could change the world. Now her vision is helping other families avoid our mistakes. The conversation gradually shifted from past grievances to future possibilities. Miguel's expertise in education administration offered valuable insights for the Foundation scholarship programs. Elena's work in family counseling aligned perfectly with their support services for reunited families. Perhaps Miguel suggested cautiously the Foundation could benefit from a family advisory board. People who understand both the corporate and personal sides of separation. Clara's eyes lit up with her mother's characteristic enthusiasm. "That's exactly what we need. Real experiences informing corporate policy changes." As dessert was served, Lucia's favorite flan, made from her handwritten recipe, the mood shifted subtly. The Ramirez family photographs seemed less like a memorial and more like chapters in an ongoing story. "We have something else to share," Clara announced, retrieving a document from her bag. It detailed the creation of the Lucia Martinez Memorial Scholarship at Harvard, specifically for children of single parents pursuing education degrees. Maria's hands trembled as she read the criteria. This is what she would have wanted: education opening doors, creating opportunities for understanding. But Gabriel watched his daughter move comfortably among her extended family, bridging the gap between corporate efficiency and family warmth with natural grace. In her he saw the perfect balance Lucia had always strived for: ambition tempered by compassion, determination guided by love. As the evening drew to a close, Miguel pulled Gabriel aside in the hallway where Lucia's graduation photograph hung. "We can't change the past," he said quietly, "but perhaps we can help shape a future where other families don't face the same choices." The family gathered for one final photograph, positioning themselves beneath Lucia's images. Clara stood between Gabriel and Maria, connecting the branches of her family tree that had been separated for so long. The camera captured not just reconciliation, but the beginning of something new, a family united in purpose, determined to transform their personal healing into societal change. The Harvard University Library's annual donor recognition ceremony took on special significance that autumn evening. The newly established Lucia Martinez Reading Room occupied the space where, 20 years earlier, a scholarship student and a literature major had first crossed paths at table 23. Gabriel stood at the podium, addressing an audience that bridged his past and present worlds. Corporate leaders mingled with educators, while foundation beneficiaries sat alongside Harvard administrators. Clara, wearing a pendant that had belonged to Lucia, managed the proceedings with practiced grace. Education, Gabriel began, has the power to transform not just individuals but entire systems of thought. My late partner, Lucia Martinez, understood this fundamental truth. She taught literature not just as stories on pages, but as blueprints for understanding human connection. The reading room's design reflected this philosophy. Modern study spaces coexisted with comfortable reading nooks. Corporate finance textbooks shared shelves with classical literature, embodying the balance Lucia had always advocated between ambition and empathy. The Lucia Martinez Memorial Scholarship, Clara announced, has already selected its first cohort of recipients. 10 students from single-parent households, each pursuing degrees in education with a focus on corporate family dynamics. Their research will directly inform the Foundation's work in corporate policy reform. Maria Martinez unveiled the room's centerpiece, a portrait of Lucia teaching her last literature class. The artist had captured her characteristic gesture of connecting ideas, one hand reaching toward her students, while the other held open a well-worn book. This space, Clara continued, represents more than academic resources. It stands as a testament to the possibility of transformation. Here, future business leaders will study alongside aspiring educators, each learning from the other's perspective. The Foundation's quarterly report, distributed to attendees, detailed the impact of their integrated approach. Corporate partners had reported improved retention rates and employee satisfaction after implementing family impact assessments. Educational institutions noted increased engagement when business ethics courses included real-world family case studies. Regina, who had transitioned from corporate executive assistant to the Foundation's chief operating officer, presented the expansion plans. We're establishing similar reading rooms at business schools nationwide, she explained. Each space will serve as both a research center and a reminder that corporate success need not come at the cost of family bonds. Miguel Ramirez, now heading the Foundation's educational initiatives, shared insights from their pilot programs. When we integrate family impact awareness into business education, he noted, we change not just policies but mindsets. Future leaders learn to measure success through both financial and human metrics. The ceremony's highlight came when Clara introduced the evening's special guests, 3 families recently reunited through the Foundation's corporate reform programs. Their stories of separation and reunion echoed the themes in Lucia's favorite literary works, which now lined the reading room's walls. My mother believed that every story of separation contained within it the seeds of reunion, Clara reflected. This room, like the Foundation itself, exists to nurture those seeds, to ensure that future generations understand that true success encompasses both professional achievement and human connection. Gabriel watched his daughter address the gathering, seeing in her presence the perfect synthesis of his business acumen and Lucia's humanitarian vision. The Foundation's work had evolved beyond simple corporate reform into a movement for systemic change. As the evening concluded, attendees gathered in small groups throughout the reading room, creating the very kind of connections Lucia had always fostered in her classroom. Corporate executives engaged with scholarship recipients, while educators shared insights with business students. At table 23, now marked with a small bronze plaque, Gabriel, Clara, and Maria sat together, surrounded by Lucia's favorite books. The space that had once witnessed the beginning of a love story now served as the foundation for a broader narrative of reconciliation and renewal. "Mum would love this," Clara observed, running her hand along the table's worn surface. "A place where business and humanity learn from each other, where future leaders discover that success has many definitions." Gabriel nodded, understanding, finally achieving what Lucia had tried to teach him 2 decades ago, that true wealth lay not in corporate acquisitions or market shares, but in the connections we build and the changes we inspire. As autumn leaves danced past the library windows, just as they had 20 years before, the Lucia Martinez reading room hummed with the energy of new possibilities. Each conversation, each connection, each moment of understanding represented another step toward the world Lucia had envisioned, one where success was measured not just in profits, but in the strength of human bonds. 1 year after the establishment of the Lucia Martinez Foundation, Gabriel stood in the atrium of their new headquarters, a restored Victorian mansion in Cambridge, just blocks from Harvard's campus. The morning sun streamed through stained glass windows, illuminating the space where dozens of corporate leaders had gathered for the Foundation's first annual Impact Report presentation. When we began this journey, Gabriel addressed the assembled group, his voice carrying the authority of experience tempered by hard-won wisdom. Many questioned whether corporate success and family unity could truly coexist. Today's data tells a compelling story. Regina presented the Foundation's achievements with precise clarity: 200 families reunited through corporate policy reforms, 50 companies implementing comprehensive family impact assessments, and a groundbreaking partnership with 10 leading business schools to integrate family-conscious leadership into their curricula. "The metrics that matter most," Clara continued, taking the podium, "aren't found in traditional financial statements. They're measured in children reconnecting with parents, in careers rebuilt without sacrificing family bonds, and in corporate cultures transformed through understanding." James Pierce, their first corporate partner, shared his company's experience implementing the Foundation's recommendations. "Our employee retention has increased by 40%, he reported. Productivity has risen, while stress-related leave has decreased significantly. It turns out that supporting family connections creates measurable business value." The presentation included testimonials from business leaders who had initially resisted change. Victoria Blackwood's successor at Mendes Corp, now operating under new leadership, described their journey from skepticism to full adoption of family-conscious policies. "The Foundation's approach succeeds," she explained, "because it speaks both languages: the quantitative metrics that drive business decisions and the human elements that give those decisions meaning." Maria Martinez, overseeing the Foundation's educational initiatives, presented data from their scholarship program. 25 students from single-parent households were now pursuing advanced degrees, their research directly informing corporate policy development. "Education was Lucia's passion," Maria reminded the audience, her voice steady with purpose. She believed that understanding could bridge any divide. Today's results prove she was right. The Foundation's impact extended beyond direct family reunification. Companies participating in their corporate reform program reported improved employee satisfaction, reduced turnover, and enhanced public trust. The business case for family-conscious leadership had become undeniable. Clara introduced their newest initiative, a certification program for family-conscious corporations. "This isn't just another corporate credential," she explained. "It's a comprehensive assessment of how business practices affect family bonds, backed by measurable outcomes and ongoing accountability." Gabriel watched his daughter command the room with a perfect blend of corporate precision and humanitarian vision. In her presentation style, he recognized his own attention to detail merged with Lucia's gift for connecting with people's hearts. The Foundation's success had attracted international attention. Delegations from Europe and Asia had come to study their model of corporate reform. What had begun as one family's journey of reconciliation was evolving into a global movement for change. "Our next phase," Gabriel announced, focuses on preventive measures. Instead of healing family separations after they occur, we're working to create corporate environments where such choices become unnecessary. The announcement of their new Corporate Leadership Academy drew particular interest. Located in the renovated Mendes Tower, now repurposed as an educational center, it would train the next generation of business leaders in balancing professional achievement with family values. Regina presented the financial data supporting their approach. Companies implementing their recommendations had seen an average 27% improvement in key performance indicators, demonstrating that family-conscious policies could drive business success. 1 year ago, Clara concluded, we stood in this room and promised to transform how business measures success. Today's results show that when we value human connections as much as corporate metrics, everyone prospers. As the presentation ended, Gabriel observed the interactions among attendees. Corporate executives engaged with family advocacy groups, educators consulted with business strategists, and foundation beneficiaries shared their stories with potential partners. The foundation had become more than a redemption story or a corporate reform initiative. It had evolved into a living testament to Lucia's belief that education, understanding, and love could transform even the most entrenched systems. Maria joined them at the podium, completing the family circle that now guided the foundation's work. Lucia always said that true success creates more than it takes, she reminded them. Today, we're finally proving her right. The Lucia Martinez Foundation's healing program launched on a crisp autumn morning in the renovated East Wing of their Cambridge headquarters. The space, designed with both therapeutic and educational purposes in mind, reflected Lucia's belief that healing required both heart and mind. Clara led the inaugural session, addressing a diverse group of participants, corporate executives, reconnecting with estranged children, adult children seeking to understand parents who had chosen career over family, and business students determined to forge a different path. Today marks the beginning of a new approach to corporate family reconciliation, Clara began, her voice carrying her mother's warmth and her father's authority. We're not here to assign blame or dwell on past choices. Instead, we're creating a framework for understanding and moving forward. The program's innovative structure combined traditional family therapy with corporate strategy sessions. Participants worked simultaneously on healing personal relationships and transforming business practices, recognizing how the two intersected. Dr. Sarah Chen, the program's lead psychologist, introduced their methodology. We've developed a unique approach that addresses both emotional healing and systemic change. Participants learn to recognize patterns in their personal lives that mirror broader corporate culture issues. Throughout the day, families engaged in carefully structured dialogues. In one room, a CEO father practiced active listening with his teenage daughter. In another, a group of adult children analyzed case studies of corporate policies that had affected their own families. Gabriel participated not as a founder but as a fellow participant, sharing his journey from corporate isolation to family reconciliation. His vulnerability encouraged others to examine their own choices with similar honesty. The hardest part, he admitted during a group session, wasn't losing the company or the wealth. It was facing how my choices had affected not just my family, but countless others through the corporate culture I helped create. The program incorporated elements from Lucia's teaching methods. Participants read literature exploring themes of separation and reunion, using these stories to better understand their own experiences. Corporate case studies were analyzed through both business and human impact lenses. Maria Martinez contributed her perspective as both a grandmother who had enabled separation and a witness to healing. Her sessions on breaking the cycle helped participants identify and address intergenerational patterns of family-career conflict. Regina's corporate expertise proved invaluable in helping participants develop practical strategies for change. She worked with executives to create new policies that supported family bonds while maintaining business effectiveness. The afternoon sessions focused on action planning. Each participant developed 2 parallel strategies, one for personal family healing and another for implementing family-conscious practices in their professional spheres. The program's strength, Clara explained to observers from other foundations, lies in its recognition that personal and systemic change must occur simultaneously. We're not just healing individual families, we're transforming how business and family interact. Feedback from the first cohort proved remarkably positive. Participants reported improved communication with family members and a deeper understanding of how corporate practices affected personal relationships. The Foundation's research team carefully documented outcomes, building an evidence base for their approach. Early data showed promising results. 85% of participants reported significant improvement in family relationships, while 90% initiated concrete changes in their corporate practices. As evening approached, the group gathered for a closing ceremony that had become a Foundation tradition. Each participant placed a stone in a growing garden installation, symbolizing their commitment to building a new foundation for family-conscious business leadership. Every stone represents a story, Clara explained, a commitment to change and a step toward the world my mother envisioned, one where success enriches rather than diminishes family bonds. Gabriel observed the ceremony from the garden's edge, noting how the participants' body language had shifted throughout the day. The rigid corporate postures had softened, making room for genuine human connection. The program would continue with weekly sessions over 3 months, supplemented by online resources and peer support networks. Already waitlists were forming for future cohorts, and requests were coming in to establish similar programs internationally. We're creating more than a healing program, Clara concluded in her closing remarks. We're building a community of leaders committed to redefining success. Each story of reconciliation becomes a blueprint for others to follow. On the 20th anniversary of Lucia Martinez's passing, Harvard's historic library hosted a ceremony that bridged past and present. The Lucia Martinez Reading Room, once Table 23's modest corner, had expanded to occupy the entire east wing of the building. Here, corporate leadership students now studied alongside education majors, embodying the integration Lucia had always championed. Gabriel Mendes stood before the gathered audience, his silver hair catching the same autumn light that had illuminated his first meeting with Lucia 2 decades earlier. Clara, now a recognized authority on corporate family dynamics, sat in the front row beside Maria Martinez, their presence completing a circle of healing and transformation. 20 years ago, Gabriel began, his voice carrying the weight of experience. Success to me meant corporate acquisitions and market dominance. Today we measure success differently, not in quarterly profits, but in families reunited, relationships restored, and corporate cultures transformed. The Foundation's impact had exceeded their most optimistic projections. Over 1,000 families reconciled through their programs, 200 corporations implementing comprehensive family-conscious policies, and a new generation of business leaders emerging with a fundamentally different understanding of success. The Lucia Martinez Foundation, Clara continued, taking the podium, began as one family's journey of healing. It has grown into a movement that challenges the fundamental assumptions about business success and human connection. Maria presented their latest initiative, the Lucia Martinez Institute for Corporate Transformation, a research and education center dedicated to studying the intersection of business success and family well-being. The institute would occupy the renovated Mendes Tower, transforming a symbol of corporate power into a beacon of humanitarian leadership. Regina, who had overseen the Foundation's growth from concept to global influence, shared remarkable statistics. Companies adopting their family-conscious framework reported unprecedented levels of employee retention, productivity, and stakeholder trust. The business case for human-centered leadership had become irrefutable. Perhaps most significantly, Gabriel noted, we've witnessed a cultural shift in how success is defined. When I lost my company, I thought I'd lost everything. Instead, I found what truly matters and helped others do the same. The ceremony included testimonials from Foundation beneficiaries. Corporate leaders spoke of reconciliation with estranged children. Adult children described renewed relationships with parents who had once chosen career over family. Each story reflected Lucia's belief in the power of understanding and second chances. Clara unveiled their 20-year vision, expanding the Foundation's model globally while remaining true to its core mission of family reconciliation through corporate transformation. The plan included partnerships with international business schools, corporate training programs, and family support initiatives. My mother taught literature because she believed stories could change how we see the world, Clara explained. Today we're helping write new stories about success, family, and the possibility of change. The Foundation's work had begun to influence policy at national levels. Legislators consulted their research when crafting family-friendly business regulations. Corporate boards increasingly included family impact assessments in their decision-making processes. Gabriel watched his daughter address the gathering, seeing in her the perfect synthesis of his business acumen and Lucia's humanitarian vision. The Foundation had become more than a memorial or a mission. It was a living testament to the power of choosing love over ambition, understanding over isolation. 20 years ago, he concluded, I stood in this library and made a choice that separated a family. Today, we stand here united, not just as a family, but as part of a movement that helps others avoid similar choices. As the ceremony ended, attendees moved through the reading room, where Lucia's favorite books shared space with corporate ethics texts and family psychology resources. The space embodied her belief that true education bridges divides and opens hearts. In a quiet moment, Gabriel, Clara, and Maria gathered at table 23, now marked with a simple bronze plaque. The autumn light streamed through the windows, casting the same patterns that had witnessed the beginning of this story 2 decades ago. Mom would be proud, Clara said softly, touching the plaque that bore Lucia's name. Not just of what we've built, but of how we've built it, by bringing people together, by choosing understanding over division. Gabriel nodded, finally at peace with his journey from corporate titan to humanitarian leader. Your mother always said that true success creates more than it takes. It took me 20 years to understand what she meant. As evening fell over Harvard's campus, the Lucia Martinez reading room remained lit from within, a beacon of hope and transformation. The Foundation's work would continue, guided by the simple truth Lucia had tried to teach, that love, understanding, and connection are the truest measures of success. What did this story stir in you? We'd love to hear your thoughts on how Gabriel's journey from corporate success to discovering true wealth resonates with your own experiences. Have you ever faced a choice between career ambition and family connections? Share your perspective in the comments below. Your story might inspire others facing similar crossroads. If you found value in this story of redemption and transformation, consider subscribing to our channel. We bring you carefully curated stories that explore the complexities of human relationships and personal growth. Hit the notification bell to join our community of thoughtful viewers who appreciate meaningful narratives. Every story has the power to change someone's perspective. If this tale of choosing love over ambition touched you, share it with others who might need this message. Your share could be the catalyst that helps someone reconnect with what truly matters in their life. Together we can spread understanding of how success can encompass both professional achievement and genuine human connection.